They thought you were replaceable, disposable, easy to walk away from, so they left, not because you lacked value, but because they lacked the vision to see it. In their blindness, they traded depth for distraction, loyalty for novelty, and authenticity for illusion. And now, in the quiet hours when no one else is watching, they feel it. That aching emptiness where your presence used to be. You were the one who stood by them when no one else did. The one who gave without keeping score. The one who believed in them when they had nothing to show. But they left all of that behind for something lesser, something easier, something that wouldn't challenge them to grow. What they didn't realize then is that walking away from someone rare doesn't make you powerful. It makes you a fool in the long run. And now, the very peace you built in your healing becomes the torment they carry in their silence. This is the haunting price of abandoning what was never meant to be discarded. The tragic misjudgment of value. There's a painful irony in human behavior that repeats itself across time, cultures, and relationships. We often don't recognize the value of something until it's gone. The person who poured their heart into us, who showed up consistently, who offered the kind of quiet strength that asks for no applause, we overlook them. And not because they lacked greatness, but because their greatness was humble, not loud. It didn't demand attention, it simply gave without needing credit. That kind of presence, to an untrained eye, can feel ordinary, but it's only in the absence of that quiet grace that its rarity becomes heartbreakingly clear. Many people walk away from real substance in search of surface-level stimulation. They trade connection for chemistry, depth for convenience, and commitment for temporary validation. In the moment, it feels exciting, like they've escaped something that was holding them back. But what they've actually escaped is the very thing that was grounding them, the very person who was patient with their storms, who believed in their transformation, and who stayed loyal when life became heavy. That kind of presence isn't easy to find twice. In fact, once lost, it often never returns. It's tragic how quickly people label consistency as boring and loyalty as a given. We live in a time where immediate gratification is often more appealing than long-term truth. And so, people leave. They chase something shinier, something that flatters their ego instead of confronting their flaws. But what they forget is that everything shiny eventually fades, and everything that flatters also deceives. Real value isn't always flashy, it's steady, and steady can feel invisible until the chaos of life reveals just how much it anchored you. There is a moment, often much later, when the truth begins to dawn on them. It comes quietly, without announcement, but it settles deep. They realize the laughter they now hear feels hollow, the conversations lack substance, the new connection doesn't know their past, doesn't understand their wounds, and doesn't carry the patience to walk through healing with them. And then they remember you, the one who did. The one who saw their brokenness and didn't run. The one who gave, not to be owed, but because you loved with integrity. That memory becomes heavier over time. You see, people don't just regret who they left, they regret why they left. Because it forces them to confront an uncomfortable truth. They didn't leave because something was missing in you. They left because something was undeveloped in them. Their departure was never a reflection of your inadequacy. It was a reflection of their inability to recognize emotional wealth when it was standing in front of them. And now, they have to live with the quiet realization that they misjudged the very thing they needed most. This is the tragedy of misjudging value. It doesn't scream when it leaves, it simply exits. It doesn't come back in the same form. Even if life offers a second chance, something sacred has already changed. Trust has been fractured, innocence lost, and love turned into memory. And what haunts them is not just that you're gone, but that you were the right one, and they couldn't see it until it was far too late. Now, as you rise slowly, surely, and rebuild yourself piece by piece, the very peace you fought so hard to earn becomes a reminder to them of everything they could have protected, but didn't, and that, more than any words, becomes the echo of what they lost. The cost of betraying loyalty. Loyalty is one of those rare qualities that can't be bought, forced, or manufactured. It is earned slowly over time, tested through difficulty, and proven through consistency. When someone gives you their loyalty, they are offering something deeper than affection. They are offering their trust, their patience, and their willingness to stand beside you even when things aren't perfect. And when that loyalty is betrayed, the loss is not just emotional, it is spiritual. Something sacred is broken, and it's not easily repaired. People often assume loyalty is endless, that if someone is loyal once, they will be loyal forever. But loyalty, while deep, is not blind. It watches quietly. It notices everything. And though it forgives, it never forgets. When someone is taken for granted, when their loyalty is dismissed as weakness or routine, the one who walks away believes they are leaving behind something passive. What they fail to understand is that loyalty is not weakness, it is strength under control. And when that strength is betrayed, it doesn't return with the same softness again. The true cost of betraying loyalty doesn't show up right away. In the beginning, life may seem unchanged. The person who walked away might feel free, even empowered. They might believe they've made the right decision. But over time, when the noise settles and the distractions fade, what remains is the absence of someone who truly cared, someone who stood by them not because they had to, but because they chose to. That absence grows heavier. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, it's just there, showing up in moments when life becomes quiet and real again. And for the one who remained loyal, the betrayal is more than an emotional injury, it's a questioning of worth. How could someone they stood by so faithfully turn away so easily? How could their effort, their sacrifice, and their belief be so quickly dismissed? These are the wounds that don't bleed, but they ache deeply. Yet in that pain, there is also revelation, the realization that loyalty must be given to those who recognize its worth, not to those who misuse it. Betrayal always carries a cost, not just for the person who is betrayed, but for the one who betrays. Because when you break something that was pure, something that stood with you when you were at your lowest, you don't just lose a person, you lose access to a kind of love that the world doesn't offer easily. And once you've known that kind of presence, everything else feels somewhat empty in comparison. What many people come to realize too late is that loyalty can't be replaced. You can find new company, new distractions, even new affection. But that deep, unwavering loyalty, the kind that stays when things are hard, the kind that speaks truth when lies would be easier, the kind that sacrifices quietly behind the scenes once it's gone, it doesn't come back the same way. It returns more guarded, more discerning, more distant. So those who walk away, thinking they've outgrown your loyalty, often find themselves haunted not by what they chose, but by what they abandoned. Because eventually they learn the new people in their life might laugh with them, might share good times, but they won't have that history. They won't understand the storms you weathered together. They won't know how to hold them when they're breaking inside. And in those moments they remember you, not because they want to, but because they can't help it. Betraying loyalty is easy in the short term, but its cost is long term. It is the quiet grief of realizing you had something real and you let it go. And for many, that realization doesn't just hurt, it lingers. Not as punishment, but as a reminder. a reminder of the kind of soul they had by their side, and the kind of loss they chose instead. Time reveals what impulse conceals in the heat of the moment. Everything seems clear. Emotions surge, dissatisfaction grows, and the mind begins to wander toward something or someone that feels easier, lighter, or simply different. In that emotional whirlwind, impulsive choices begin to seem like liberation. People convince themselves they're escaping something broken, when in truth they may simply be running from discomfort, from responsibility, or from the slow work of growth that love sometimes requires. Impulse, by its nature, is short-sighted. It feeds off emotion, thrives on urgency, and doesn't stop to examine consequences. It whispers that something new is always better. It disguises itself as clarity when it's often just restlessness in disguise. And so people leave jobs, friendships, relationships in search of something they believe will fill the space within them. But what they don't realize at the time is that the space they feel isn't always created by what's around them, but by what's unresolved inside them. Time, however, is not deceived. Time doesn't rush. It doesn't act on emotion or react to temporary feelings. Time waits, it watches, and eventually it reveals what impulse tries so hard to hide. That new connection may not have the patience the last one did. That exciting path might lack the stability that once held them steady. That freedom they chased might slowly begin to feel like emptiness wrapped in temporary pleasure. And with time, the truth always finds a way to surface. One of the most sobering things a person can experience is looking back at a decision made in haste and realizing it cost them more than they ever expected. It wasn't just about leaving a relationship. It was about leaving someone who prayed for them, who believed in their potential when they didn't believe in themselves. It wasn't just about choosing a different lifestyle. It was about walking away from peace, from purpose, from something that gave their life meaning. These aren't losses that hit immediately. They sink in gradually, like echoes in an empty room. The difference between impulse and wisdom is time. Time forces reflection. It doesn't matter how convinced someone was when they left eventually, they will face moments of stillness where they must sit with the consequences of what they chose. They'll scroll through memories they once took for granted. They'll remember the laughter that came from shared understanding, not just shared moments. They'll feel the absence of that one person who showed up, day after day, without needing to be asked. And that's when it dawns on them they didn't walk away from a problem. They walked away from a person who was willing to grow with them, who loved them despite their imperfections, who stayed loyal even through confusion. The impulsive decision, once celebrated as independence, begins to feel like self-sabotage dressed as freedom. And there's no undoing it once time reveals the truth. You can reconnect, you can apologize, but you can't relive what was lost in that moment of blindness. For the one left behind, the journey looks different. There's pain, yes, but there is also clarity. Time for them becomes a healer. It shows them they were never the problem. It reveals their strength, their capacity to love deeply, and their ability to rebuild with integrity. The same time that exposes another's regret becomes the season where they reclaim their peace, their confidence, and their worth. In the end, it's not revenge that settles the score, it's time. Time doesn't shout. It doesn't argue, it simply unveils the truth piece by piece. And while impulse may speak in loud moments of escape, time speaks in the quiet aftermath, and its voice, though soft, is impossible to ignore. The return of unfinished accountability. When people walk away from someone who genuinely cared for them, they often think the story ends there. They imagine they can close the chapter, move on, and never look back. In their minds, leaving is the final decision, and whatever was left unsaid, whatever damage was done, will simply fade with time. But life doesn't work that way. Emotional actions carry weight, and that weight, if ignored, doesn't disappear. It lingers in the background, growing heavier until it eventually demands to be acknowledged. There's a truth many discover too late, that unfinished accountability always returns. The decisions we make in haste, the people we hurt without explanation, the promises we break without remorse, none of it truly stays buried. Time may cover it for a while, but it never erases it. Because accountability isn't about public apology or grand gestures. It's about facing the quiet consequences that follow us into the most unexpected moments. Moments when the world is still and memory speaks louder than noise. When someone betrays or abandons a person who was there for them, they often justify it in their mind. I had to do what was best for me. They'll move on. It wasn't that deep. These thoughts help ease the discomfort temporarily, but deep down, the human heart remembers the truth. It remembers who was loyal when times were hard. It remembers who forgave when no one else would. It remembers the depth of a connection that wasn't perfect, but was real, and that memory becomes the doorway through which accountability quietly walks back in. What's often misunderstood is that accountability isn't just about feeling sorry. It's about facing the effects of your choices. That might look like watching someone you once dismissed grow into their strength without you. It might look like seeing them loved in the way you couldn't give. It might be realizing that the peace you now see in them came from pain you helped cause, and now you're no longer part of the version they healed into. That realization doesn't strike like lightning. It creeps in slowly, and once it settles, it changes how you see your past. The return of accountability doesn't always involve words. Often, it shows up in internal reflections, in sleepless nights, in quiet drives, in sudden emotions triggered by familiar places or songs. It appears in the realization that while you moved on, something important was left unresolved. It's not punishment, it's not revenge. It's simply the echo of responsibility coming back for what was avoided. And no matter how far someone tries to run from it, the truth eventually catches up. For the person who was left behind, this can bring a strange sense of peace. Not because they want someone else to suffer, but because they no longer have to carry the question, was it my fault? Time and accountability answer that question with clarity. No, it wasn't your fault. You were honest, you were loyal, you gave all you could, and sometimes that's not enough for someone who isn't ready to receive it. But the unfinished business they tried to leave behind, that becomes theirs to carry, not yours. Life has a way of restoring balance, not always in the way we expect, but in the way we need. Those who walked away without closure eventually find themselves circling back, not always in person, but in thought. And that inner reckoning becomes part of their story, one they can't rewrite, only learn from. Because the truth is, you can move forward from the past, but only if you face it. If not, it moves forward with you, waiting patiently to be owned. And when that moment arrives, when the weight of unfinished accountability finally returns, it doesn't just ask what they did. It asks who they became because of it. You were the mirror of what they lacked in every close relationship, whether romantic, familial, or friendship. We become mirrors to each other. We reflect not only the beauty and potential that lives within another person, but also the areas they've tried to hide, deny, or ignore. And sometimes, that reflection is too honest for someone who isn't ready to confront themselves. When they looked at you, they didn't just see who you were. They saw everything inside themselves that they hadn't yet faced: their insecurities, their inconsistencies, their emotional immaturity. And instead of growing through that discomfort, they chose to walk away from the mirror. You didn't hurt them, you challenged them. Your love wasn't harmful, it was clarifying. Your honesty wasn't too much, it was what growth required. But for someone not yet ready to grow, that kind of truth feels like confrontation. You didn't make them feel small. You simply showed up with the kind of presence that exposed how small they had kept their own capacity for love, for accountability, for depth. And that contrast was uncomfortable, because while you were willing to evolve, they were still trying to protect a version of themselves they had outgrown, but were afraid to leave behind. Many people crave deep connection, but when they find it, they realize it comes with responsibility. Real closeness requires vulnerability. It requires listening, apologizing, adjusting. It requires looking inward when something goes wrong, not just blaming what's outside. And that's what you brought: not just affection, but depth. Not just companionship, but reflection. You showed them how much more they could be, how much more they were capable of. But to someone not yet ready to rise into that version of themselves, that kind of presence can feel threatening. The tragedy is that instead of rising to meet you, they may have chosen to run. Not because you were wrong for them, but because you reminded them of everything they had avoided. You became the living reminder of their untapped potential, of the promises they made to themselves but never fulfilled, of the emotional healing they postponed, of the habits they knew were sabotaging them but didn't want to give up. You didn't cause their discomfort. You revealed it, and that revelation became too heavy for someone still hiding from their own truth. This is something many people only understand much later, after distance, after silence, after time has stripped away the noise. They begin to realize that you were not the enemy of their peace, but the guide toward it. You didn't demand perfection, only honesty. You didn't need them to be everything, only to try. And once that realization sets in, it becomes clear that the issue was never you asking for too much. It was them being unwilling to give what was already within them, buried beneath years of fear and avoidance. You were never too intense. You were never too emotional. You were simply clear. And in a world full of distractions, avoidance, and emotional shortcuts, clarity can feel like a disruption. But the right people won't be intimidated by that clarity. They'll be drawn to it. They'll meet it with courage, not retreat. They'll see your presence not as pressure, but as a gift. And as they continue through life, they may come across many others, people who are easier, more distant, less demanding of depth. But none of them will reflect their truth the way you did. None of them will call them higher, gently but firmly, the way you once did. And while that memory may be painful for them to revisit, it will remain not to torment but to teach. Because in the end, you weren't just someone they knew. You were a mirror, and that mirror didn't lie. It simply reflected what they needed to see, even if they weren't ready to face it.